This is a message of thanks and gratitude to all you amazing Reluctant Preppers who are making Reluctant Preppers possible by supporting our mission on Patreon. With your help, we're overcoming a 75% drop in YouTube earnings because you're not standing still, but are doing something about it and taking action by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging to keep us on the air. Now our team is 42 patrons strong and growing, and when we reach 100 patrons, we'll start sending out tokens of gratitude as a handwritten note from your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and an autograph signed on a U.S. Silver Eagle to one of our patrons selected at random each and every month. If you haven't yet taken the step of joining in to support Reluctant Preppers, it's so easy. Just go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledge any amount you can. You guys are awesome, and we can do this together with your help at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Did you know you can buy silver at spot price? Get your 10-ounce bar of silver at spot price today. Go to sdbullion.com/RP. Not only will you be buying silver without any premium, you'll also be supporting the independent media. Reluctant Preppers gets a small commission when you take advantage of this special offer, going to sdbullion.com/RP. That's sdbullion.com/RP.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We are finally able to bring you this returning guest after a long respite. John Rubino, the founder and host of DollarCollapse.com, the author of The Money Bubble with co-author James Turk from GoldMoney, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers after a long respite. John, thank you once again for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Hi, Dunnigan. Good to be back. You know, when we spoke a few months ago, we decided that there was going to be a lot to talk about when we did get together in September. And that's the case. A lot has happened in the last few months.
You kept saying that there should be plenty to talk about by September was the line you kept mentioning to me throughout the summer. And in fact, it's been an unbelievable series of events. If we could start with one cluster of events surrounding the global pivot away from the U.S. dollar, we've had actions taken by China as far as their gold-backed oil contracts in the yuan. We've had Venezuela just this last weekend come out pricing their oil only in the yuan rather than the U.S. dollar, and on the litany seems to go. What is going on? You mentioned a new term that's been coined around this. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called De-Dollarization, and it's gaining steam. The background is that the U.S. has had the world's reserve currency since World War II. But since 1971, when we broke the link between the dollar and gold, all the major currencies of the world have been fiat currencies, but the U.S. dollar has been preeminent. And that gave us an amazing amount of power. We could create as many new dollars as we wanted to, and the whole world would take them and give us real stuff in return. So that allowed us basically to build a $1 trillion a year military empire that spans the globe and intimidates everybody in sight. At the same time that we built a $1 trillion a year cradle-to-grave entitlement system that spends a huge amount of money and takes care of people in various ways at various times of their lives. Normally, even a rich country would be a little strapped trying to manage one of those two things, but we can manage both because we can borrow as much money as we want on the global markets. We can print as many new dollars as we want and get away with it, basically. And this irks a lot of other countries, Russia and China in particular, who would like to be regional powers, if not global powers. And we're standing in their way, both financially because we dominate the global banking system and militarily because we can beat their military. We spend more in a year on the military than the next 5 or 8 or 10 countries. I forget what the exact number is, but it's a big number countries spend. And that gives us really unassailable military power. Which derives from the fact that we have the world's reserve currency. So a lot of other countries would like to end the dollar's preeminence and in that way scale back U.S. power. And they're starting to take steps in that direction now. Russia and China and India have been buying up pretty much all the gold that's produced by the world's gold mines for the past few years. And people have been speculating about what they were doing, what their goal was with all that gold that they were accumulating. And there are a lot of reasons for a country to accumulate gold, most of them very beneficial. But it looks like one of their goals now was to be able to, to an extent, back their currencies with gold and create alternatives to the US dollar for international trade. As you mentioned, China just set up or is in the process of setting up, a futures market on which oil can be traded not in US dollars. See, all the oil in the world just about now is traded in dollars. And that's one of the big factors keeping the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, because you need dollars if you want to buy oil and if you want to buy lots of other things. But take that oil requirement away and maybe people don't need as many dollars. So anyhow, China has set up this futures trading exchange and is backing the currency, the yuan, that's used on the exchange with gold, which means that whereas trading oil on a dollar-based exchange means that you're dependent on the value of the dollar. If they can't deliver the oil, they give you dollars in exchange. And the dollar has to hold its value for the deal to work out for you. Well, on the Chinese exchange, you get gold instead of dollars. And historically, gold has held its value, maintained its purchasing power much, much better than any fiat currency, including the dollar. So having a contract backed in gold is in some ways superior to having it be backed by dollars. So to the extent that the Chinese exchange becomes popular and a lot of oil is traded on it, that breaks the stranglehold that the dollar has had up till now on oil trading. And if that kind of thing spreads to the rest of the world, then the people who are holding billions or trillions of dollars right now as reserve assets and as a bankroll for trading, et cetera, won't need as many dollars. And so they'll rebalance by selling some of their dollars and buying some of these other currencies that they can now use for international trade. And that'll put a lot of downward pressure on the value of the dollar relative to these other currencies. In other words, the dollar could go from being the strong currency in a world of weak currencies to a weak currency, to the weakest currency, the sick currency out of all of these. And that would be dramatically different for us because we can't pay our bills right now. The U.S. has to create several $1 trillion of credit every year and has to borrow a lot of money from the rest of the world. And that's easy for us to do as long as everybody wants dollars, because we can create dollars, send them out into the world, or we can create treasury bonds and sell them to the rest of the world, and they'll treat them like dollars. Because they basically are dollars as long as the dollar is a strong currency. Well, make the dollar a weak currency, and all of a sudden people aren't going to want to buy our treasury bonds anymore, at least not at the current low level of interest rates. So let's say our interest rate goes up. In other words, the price that other people are going to charge to lend us money goes way up. Then the interest cost that the U.S. government has to manage in order to run itself goes through the roof. If it just went back to the average interest cost for the U.S. government, just went back to what it was 20 years ago, we'd have more than $1 trillion a year of interest costs, and that would kind of break the budget of the government. So we could see kind of a death spiral in which the dollar starts to fall because other countries choose to use their own currencies for oil and other things. And that puts pressure on government finances because our interest costs go up, and that scares people even further and makes the dollar less attractive, and so on until it really crashes. I'm not predicting that because the dollar has hung on for a long, long time in the face of incredibly bad numbers out of the U.S. So maybe it'll hold on for a lot longer here, but we're creating the conditions in which something like that is at least conceivable. There are concrete things we can point to and say, yeah, this could crash the dollar via this sequence of events. some of which are beginning today. So that's where we are. And at the same time the China thing was happening, Venezuela announced that it wasn't going to accept dollars anymore for its oil. It's one of the big oil producers in the world. And so now it's going to accept yuan or euros or whatever, which means that the stranglehold of the dollar on the oil market is weakening as we speak. And there's no reason to expect this to change unless the U.S. does something dramatically to make it change. In the past, for a country to decide that it wasn't going to use dollars anymore or accept dollars in trade anymore was a easy way to guarantee regime change. We would send the CIA in and take them out if they did something like that. And maybe not so much anymore. Maybe Venezuela's onto something here, that our global power is considerably less dominant than it used to be. China and India and Russia can get away with stuff like this, and maybe Venezuela can, and then that opens the floodgates. So we'll see. It's an interesting beginning to what could be a longer, more dramatic story.
And yeah, the velocity of that is something that's of interest to our viewers, because some people have written that even though you can point to examples of this country and this country and this country who are offering oil for sale, not denominated in U.S. dollars, they're saying that doesn't automatically mean that those currencies are capable of becoming the world reserve currency overnight, that the size and the scope and the scale of liquidity in the U.S. treasuries dwarfs the others, and that for the type of sovereign business that countries need to do, that these other currencies can't handle that right now, that liquidity. Do you see it that way, or that the U.S. Treasury still kind of is the only game in town?
Oh, yeah, this doesn't happen overnight. This is just cracks in the foundation that we're seeing. But the fact that nobody's really sympathetic to the U.S. out there, and I think it's safe to say that most other countries on some level, in some way, would like to see the U.S. fail because they're annoyed with us. We're a kind of a global bully. We think of ourselves as the good guys protecting freedom around the world, but a lot of other countries see us as bullies who step in and overthrow their democratically elected president and install dictators. That's happened over and over again. We're so freaked out by the idea that Russia might have run a few websites that maybe, affected our election in some marginal way, which is kind of ironic because we engage in political dirty tricks and regime change around the world. We send the CIA in to start a coup in any country that gets in our way, and don't think anything of it. That's just geopolitics for us. But when someone does it to us, we're astounded and appalled. and the rest of the world sees that reality. They see us as being hypocrites and as having too much power and abusing the power that we have. So the fact that it's becoming possible to bypass the dollar means that kind of falls on fertile ground if it's true, that a lot of other countries will look for ways to emulate what Venezuela just did or what China and Russia are doing. And they're going to find that it's possible. If you own a lot of gold, for instance, like the Asian countries do, and you want to back your currency with gold, that kind of eliminates the dollar's advantage or some of the dollar's advantages. Because if the Chinese yuan is going to be exchangeable with gold, convertible into gold, and gold is going to go up against the U.S. dollar as it has for the past 100 years, then maybe the yuan is a better deal after all, and maybe the dollar isn't the lock to be the only international currency going forward. That things could change, and the way they work or the way they change a lot of the time in life is very slowly and almost imperceptibly, and then all at once, like the old Hemingway saying, yeah.
Little by little, and then suddenly all at once. Another thing that's been happening, it seems suddenly all at once this year, has been the rush forward of the expansion of the market cap of cryptocurrencies. And is that another area where you mentioned like all the world feeling bullied by the U.S. and bullied by the dollar and finding ways of asserting their autonomy and able to fight back? Are individuals declaring their independence from central banking basically rule by the few through cryptocurrencies. What do you see as the main driving factors for the protagonists of cryptocurrencies? What's the real promise?
Well, this is definitely part of that story. But cryptocurrencies aren't aimed directly at the US dollar. They're popular all around the world because a lot of people in a lot of places no longer trust their governments to manage their currencies competently or honestly. And so now that the technology is here for a full-on cryptocurrency, blockchain technology makes it possible to move value from one place to another instantaneously with zero friction. That's a very big deal technologically. So these things were going to be popular whenever they were viable. And the fact that they're viable today comes at a really interesting time in the global monetary system. So everybody everywhere is now aware of the soaring price of Bitcoin and all the new coins that are coming to market, and they're curious about it. And people with the technical skills to engage in Bitcoin saving and Bitcoin creating and Bitcoin trading are jumping into it with both feet. And in part, this is a direct slap at fiat currencies conceptually and in practice. And in part, it's just a technology whose time has arrived. Even if fiat currencies were reasonably well managed, the advent of cryptocurrencies would still be a big deal and still be a threat to fiat currencies, just as, e-commerce, Amazon.com is a threat to Walmart. Big box retailers do a pretty good job of what it is they do. But e-commerce, the Amazon.com experience is just much better because the technology has arrived to make it much better. Cryptocurrencies are like that. Their time has come, and so they're definitely going to spread. And they are a definite threat to the world's fiat currencies. So with the dollar having further to fall than the other fiat currencies because it's up on a pedestal right now, it may be more at risk than other currencies are to the rise of cryptocurrencies, but everybody's at risk with good reason. Government-run cryptocurrencies are a horrible idea, or government-run fiat currencies are a horrible idea because you basically hand your government an unlimited printing press, which is the same thing as an unlimited credit card. And of course they're going to abuse it, and they all are abusing it. So that was an idea that was going to fail eventually anyhow. And cryptocurrencies are one of the things that are coming along that are going to speed up that failure. Now, the question becomes, how are governments going to respond to this? And we're seeing some interesting signs that governments have begun to see cryptocurrencies as a threat, and they're trying to decide what to do about it. China just banned Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin exchanges. During the last, was it just a week, Donegan? It just seems like it happened really recently.
And
I think it was just in the last week.
Initial coin offerings, ICOs.
Yeah. And, that's one of the biggest Bitcoin markets. So for that kind of extreme regulation to be imposed on cryptocurrencies is a really interesting test for the concept, because if they can just circumvent government regulations and, the way the internet just goes around blockages in the network and still manages to deliver the data, if cryptocurrencies can do that and just bypass central banking authorities and keep on being used in these countries, then it's kind of game over for the fiat currencies. But if the monetary authorities are able to shut down cryptocurrencies within their borders, then that's a different thing. If for instance, the U.S. just made cryptocurrencies illegal because it violates the monopoly that the dollar has on financial transactions, then all cryptocurrency users would become criminals with the stroke of a pen. And that creates a completely different market. Now, it's completely within the realm of possibility that we would do something like that if we thought Bitcoin was a threat, because we've already made gold illegal within the last 100 years. Gold was illegal for citizens to own from 1934 to 1971. So we have a history of looking at forms of money that are potentially threatening to the dollar's monopoly and just taking them off the board. And if we do something like that here in the US, then who knows? I think the next couple of years are going to be fascinating for cryptocurrencies because you're going to face challenges like this. Maybe not flat out illegality, but extreme regulation and maybe co-opting by a lot of governments too. You could see governments create their own versions of Bitcoin and set them up with a lot of, monopoly privileges that free-range cryptocurrencies don't have, and then see if they outcompete the existing cryptocurrencies. We'll see that maybe happen too. You're hearing about that now, where governments are announcing their intention to create a domestic cryptocurrency. India just announced that this week too. A lot happened this last week. I think they're going to call their cryptocurrency the Lakshmi. And it's going to be Bitcoin-like, apparently, although there aren't that many details about it out there. But if India does something like that, then that could potentially throw the private sector cryptocurrency market in disarray, too. Who knows? We'll just have to see how it plays out.
What do you make of the timing of the announcement from J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon right on the heels of China's abolishing of the legality of Bitcoin exchanges and ICOs in China, saying that Bitcoin is a fraud and there's nothing behind it? What do you think about the timing of that message?
Wow. Well, an awful lot happened this week. So it's completely possible that there's some coordination going on there because otherwise that's quite a coincidence to have 5 or 6 major announcements in the cryptocurrency space happen in such a short time. So yeah, I don't know. It's completely possible that Jamie Dimon in China have been talking about this ahead of time, and he's giving them some cover, some intellectual cover. But it's also obvious that the big banks don't like cryptocurrencies. They would love to co-opt them and just have a blockchain be their new way of moving money around the world, but they don't want it to be happening in the private sector because that's a direct threat to the fiat currencies that the big banks own and profit from. If the US doesn't have an unlimited printing press through which it can hand huge amounts of new reserves to banks, which they can then use profitably before it causes inflation, then the big banks' business models don't work anymore. So it's a mortal threat to the big banks as much as it is to the central banks of the world. So it's no surprise that they don't like the idea of private sector money that isn't under the control of their local governments. So it's no surprise that Jamie Dimon thinks Bitcoin is a fraud. What he's really saying is that it's a risk to his business and his future performance bonuses.
What about other geopolitical? You mentioned some things that could cause the blow up of the U.S. dollar, the pivot away from it. You've talked about how cryptos could cause a real game change that could be a major threat to U.S. banks. We've certainly talked with you in the past about how connected and interconnected the banks are, and were there to be something that would seriously threaten the survival of one or more major banks, that could pull down the whole complex. What about other events? You mentioned in our pre-discussion about geopolitical events such as on the North Korean peninsula. If you could talk with us a little bit about some of the tensions that are there and whether you think that could potentially just come and eclipse everything else we've been talking about.
Oh, yeah. A stray missile with a nuclear weapon warhead could change everything, and make all the rest of this financial discussion irrelevant because, boom, we're in a shooting war with China on one side and a nuclear-armed North Korea on that side, and then Japan and South Korea and us on the other side. And that's a nightmare scenario. The capital of South Korea, Seoul, has 25 million people in it, and it's only 35 miles from the North Korea border. So even if North Korea can't hit us with a nuclear weapon right now, they can certainly level Seoul. And that's an awful lot of people to be at risk. So normal financial calculations go out the window when something like that happens. And we seem to be bumping right up against the possibility where it's going to happen because we're calling each other names, we're doing military exercises on each other's borders, we're shooting missiles around, and all it takes is one mistake, one fighter pilot to misread a signal out there, or one missile to go astray, or one miscalculation by the president of one or more of these countries, and we're back in a war. And the idea that that's implausible kind of flies in the face of history. Wars get started all the time because of miscalculations. You look at World War I, nobody actually wanted a gigantic continent-wide war in Europe, but they all thought that they could get away with doing things that would benefit them at a fairly low cost. And they all had these secret treaties, which required one to help the other if the first one got into trouble. And so once it started, it spiraled out of control. We're kind of like that now, where we have a lot of obligations around the world. And there are a lot of hotspots where superpowers are on opposite sides. We've got in Syria, the U.S. shooting at Russian-backed rebels and the Russians bombing U.S.-backed rebels, both groups of which have advisors from their patrons on the ground with them. We could be killing Russians and Russians could be killing Americans over there, and that could easily spiral out of control. And that's just those two places. There are other places where similar crazy stuff could happen. And history says that if you create the conditions in which things like this can happen, sometimes they do happen. So we're close to very serious mistakes being made, which lead to really, really dramatic consequences in the geopolitical world right now.
We've heard from Daniel McAdams at the Ron Paul Institute and others, Mike Rivero, talking about all wars or bankers' wars, that, as you said, if you make the conditions ripe or risky for certain things to happen, sometimes those things do happen. That what I'm about to get to is the claim that this is exactly by plan and by design, that it's very much the intention of certain powers that be, whether it's the international central bankers or others, who are marching us forward into war, and that it's in a sense unavoidable, or that's the end point here of this activity. Do you and the people that you speak with see it as an intentional activity to foment and to perpetuate a constant state of war?
Well, see, Dunnigan, that's been the question for at least the last 20 years. Are these guys incredibly stupid and clueless, and are they just blundering along, making one mistake after another mistake and leading us in random directions? Or are they brilliant and operating a long-term plan where the endpoint is some kind of a global dictatorship with them in charge and the rest of us poor and them incredibly rich? Both of those scenarios are really scary, right? And it's, I don't know. I mean, either one is plausible, but I don't have any inside information about which is actually true. But you can certainly make a case that this sort of kind of looks like it's part of a plan. Give us a military crisis in Asia or somewhere else, or the Middle East, that makes it feasible for the major governments of the world to declare martial law. In other words, we're at war, therefore civil rights are suspended for a while, just a little while, and economic freedom. No, don't think that you get to keep all your money now. We're going to raise your taxes and we're going to confiscate some of your wealth. And for a while, you don't have privacy rights or anything, but it's just till this thing is over. And, maybe after it gets resolved, then we've got a major terrorist false flag or something like that to maintain martial law, and then it just never goes away. That's, it's dystopian, but it's not out of character based on human history. We've done stuff like that in the past where governments use fake crises in order to accumulate more power. So yeah, it could be happening that way. I don't know. I don't want to think that they're actually doing that, because thinking that they're doing that is incredibly disturbing, because they've got immense power right now between surveillance technology and the size of the global military machines that are out there, and the militarization of the police force in the U.S. at least, and to an extent other places in the world, means that we're kind of building, the old saying, or the old phrase used to be, a turnkey totalitarian state, where all they have to do is flip the switch and boom, you're in a police state with total surveillance, no civil rights, police that are actually an occupying army, and capital controls, et cetera, and that's possible. I hate to think that that's where we're headed, but it's certainly one possibility. But there are other possibilities too, and one of which would be, Jim Rickards' scenario of a monetary reset, where the governments of the world recognize that the current monetary system doesn't work anymore. And the only way out from all the debt that they've taken on in the current dysfunctional system is to go back to some form of a gold standard, but with gold at like $10,000 an ounce. In other words, define the dollar and maybe the euro and a few other currencies as, some weight of gold, with the dollar being 1/10,000th of an ounce. And going forward, if the dollar is then convertible into gold and vice versa, the increase in the money supply is limited, because that's how it works under a gold standard. Your money supply is limited to the increase in the amount of gold in the world, which is 1 or 2% a year. Then you've got a sustainable monetary system going forward. That is disastrous for anybody who trusts their government and keeps a lot of money in the local currency. If you've got a big bank account in dollars and you've got a big government bond fund as your main financial asset, and the dollar is devalued by 80% or whatever in terms of gold, there's this burst of inflation, which is to say your financial assets go way down in value and your savings are largely wiped out. Well, that's the fate of a lot of people, a lot of trusting people, if we go that route. And that route is vastly superior to the one we talked about before, global war as an excuse for global dictatorship. But it's still really bad if you own a bunch of fiat currency, So you should be thinking of ways to minimize the risk of that scenario. It's hard to minimize, the risk of the other scenario where, you end up with a police state, because what do? I'm not sure in that case. But in the currency reset scenario, you can take steps that will help you come through it in pretty good shape, and maybe in great shape. If they devalue the dollar simultaneously with revaluing gold, and gold becomes $10,000 an ounce, and you own a lot of gold, then you're in good shape. Your purchasing power is preserved and maybe multiplied, depending on how all the pieces fit together. And you're one of the guys with capital going forward to rebuild the world from the mess that we've made of it. So that's something to aspire to, and it's something that's completely possible. We've been in situations before where currencies were wiped out via excessive money creation, inflation. And precious metals survived and thrived in those times. You can go all the way back to the Roman Empire, and the people who had gold coins did great. People who had copper coins, which there was plenty of copper so they could inflate away those copper coins, they were wiped out. And it's been that way over and over and over again throughout currency crises in history. So there's no reason to think that it won't be that way again if we end up with a big monetary reset and then a normal free society going forward. And since that's something we can plan for, that's a scenario that we can envision and take steps to get ourselves through it. It's something we should be doing. So gold and silver, own a lot of that. Look at other real assets like farmland or extremely well-chosen pieces of other real estate. Not San Francisco condos. Don't invest in real estate, quote unquote, in a bubble market, because then you're at extreme risk. But, a Midwestern college town or something like that, a rental house there where the economy is fairly stable and the enrollment in the college is fairly stable, and that maintains the demand for rental houses. Stuff like that is probably going to be okay because it's a real asset. They're not making a lot more of them. So that can go along with your gold and your farmland. And possibly some foreign real estate if you've got the capital to buy, a Costa Rican condo on the beach or something like that. That might also be relatively immune from what's coming. So there are things you can do. And it's psychologically beneficial to be focusing on the positive, to be taking steps that will help you in the long run, even if there's a crisis, because the alternative is really depressing. If you just look at the world and, see it clearly, as a huge mess that's only going to get messier in the short run, that could be really depressing. That could make life hard to live. So you need some positive steps, and precious metals and other kinds of real assets constitute those positive steps, I think.
Well, John, if people want to follow your work, you do quite a bit there on dollarcollapse.com. Can you tell people what assets, from an information standpoint, that you provide to make available to them there, and how they can get plugged in?
Yeah, dollarcollapse.com is a continuously updated site that covers this stuff. So the ideal, or the idea behind it, is that you visit for an hour in the morning, and you're pretty much up to speed on what happened the night before, and then check in at night, and you'll see what happened during the day. And so the gloom and doomy side of the world will be clear to you. And, there's never a shortage of stuff to publish, because there is no shortage of crazy stuff going on in the world.
Well, John Rubino, founder and host of dollarcollapse.com, thank you once again for just joining us with your down-to-earth, sort of common sense. You're a man who's very easy to listen to and really helps people to feel, explaining things in a way that we can really relate to, and just makes things, open them up and make them accessible to us. So thank you for joining us once again here on Reluctant Preppers. We always get a lot of comments and a lot of supportive, enthusiastic, thumbs up from your appearances here. Just glad you could join us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Great. Thanks, Donegan.